Brad leaned back in his chair and put his hands behind his head. He looked at Marcus with an expression that was somewhere between boredom and amusement. "So, Marcus," he said, dragging out the name as if testing how it sounded, "why don't you walk us through one of these projects? Explain how you actually built it." Marcus nodded and pulled out a detailed breakdown of his most successful application. It was a fitness tracking app that helped users monitor their workouts and nutrition. The app had over 300,000 downloads and a 4.7-star rating. He had charts showing user engagement, retention rates, and revenue generated from the premium version. This app uses a combination of native mobile development and cloud-based data storage. Marcus began. "I built the front end using React Native so it could work on both iOS and Android. The back end is built on Node.js with a MongoDB database. For the machine learning features that suggest personalized workout plans, I implemented a basic neural network that learns from user behavior patterns." As Marcus explained the technical details, he watched Brad's face. Brad was nodding, but his eyes looked glazed over, as if he wasn't really listening. Jennifer was typing something on her phone under the table. She wasn't even pretending to pay attention anymore. "The most challenging part was optimizing the battery usage," Marcus continued, determined to finish his explanation. "Mobile apps that track movement can drain battery quickly, so I had to implement efficient background processes and smart sync timing." Right, Brad interrupted, holding up his hand. "But did you really code all of this yourself? I mean, there are a lot of open source libraries out there. Maybe you just put together some existing code." Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Of course I used some libraries for standard functions. Every developer does that. But the core functionality, the unique features, the architecture, all of that is my original work. Like I said, you can verify this through my GitHub account where every commit is documented." Brad made a show of writing something in his notebook, though Marcus suspected he was just doodling. "And MIT gave you the skills for all of this?" "MIT provided a strong foundation," Marcus replied. "But I've been coding since I was 14. I taught myself initially through online resources and books. College expanded my knowledge of theory and best practices." Jennifer finally put down her phone and looked directly at Marcus for the first time in several minutes. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "a lot of companies these days are really focused on diversity hires. Was that a factor in any of your previous positions?" The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Marcus stared at Jennifer, making sure he had heard her correctly. She stared back, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She knew exactly what she had said. She wanted to see how he would react. "I was hired at my previous positions because I was the most qualified candidate," Marcus said slowly and clearly. "I went through multiple rounds of technical interviews, completed coding challenges, and demonstrated my abilities, just like any other candidate would." Of course, Jennifer said, making a note on her pad. "I'm just saying, it's something that companies consider these days. You know how it is." Brad let out a small laugh as if Jennifer had said something mildly funny. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He had walked into this interview with hope and confidence. Now he was sitting across from two people who had decided before he even opened his mouth that he wasn't good enough, or worse, that he hadn't earned anything he had achieved. "Let's talk about your education again," Brad said, leaning forward. "You went to high school in Chicago, right?" Marcus nodded, wondering where this was going. "Yes, Whitney Young Magnet High School." "Magnet school," Brad repeated as if the term itself was suspicious. "And what was that like?" "I mean, urban schools in cities like Chicago, they're not exactly known for their high standards." Marcus felt something snap inside him, but he refused to show it on his face. He had spent years in some of the most challenging academic environments in the country. He had competed with the brightest students from around the world. He had published research papers and built products that hundreds of thousands of people used. And here was this man, who probably couldn't code his way out of a paper bag, questioning the quality of his education. "Whitney Young is one of the top public high schools in the country," Marcus said, his voice tight but controlled. "It consistently ranks in the top 10 nationally. Students from my graduating class went to Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and yes, MIT. The standards were extremely high." "If you say so," Brad said with a shrug. He looked over at Jennifer and smirked. Jennifer pressed her lips together as if trying not to laugh. Marcus couldn't believe what he was experiencing. He had faced subtle discrimination before, microaggressions and coded language. But this was blatant. These two people weren't even trying to hide their prejudice. They were sitting there, in a professional interview setting, openly mocking him. "Do you have any actual questions about my technical qualifications?" Marcus asked, deciding to address the situation directly. "I'm happy to discuss programming languages, system architecture, database management, API development, or any other relevant technical topic." Sure, Brad said, waving his hand dismissively. "Let me ask you this. Do you even know what an algorithm is?" The question was so absurd that Marcus almost laughed. It was like asking a professional chef if they knew what a knife was. An algorithm was one of the most basic concepts in computer science. It was literally taught in introductory courses. An algorithm is a step-by-step procedure for solving a problem or completing a task, Marcus said, his voice flat. "It's the foundation of all programming. Would you like me to explain some specific types? I can walk you through sorting algorithms like quicksort, merge-sort, or bubble sort. Or we could discuss searching algorithms, graph algorithms, dynamic programming approaches." Brad held up his hand again. "No need to show off," he said. "I'm just making sure you know the basics." Jennifer laughed out loud at that comment. She didn't even try to cover it up. She just sat there laughing at Marcus as if he was a comedian who had told a joke. Brad grinned and looked down at his notes, clearly pleased with himself. Marcus took a deep breath. He thought about standing up and walking out. He thought about telling these two exactly what he thought of their unprofessional behavior. But he didn't. He had been raised to never give people like this the satisfaction of seeing him lose his composure. His mother had always told him that the best response to ignorance was excellence. So he sat there, back straight, head high, and waited for whatever was coming next. "Let's see," Brad said, flipping through Marcus's resume again. "You say here that you increased user retention by 40% at your last job. How exactly did you do that?" Marcus explained the process. He had analyzed user behavior data, identified the points where users were most likely to abandon the app, and redesigned those features to be more intuitive. He had implemented push notifications with personalized content and created a reward system that encouraged daily engagement. The changes had been so successful that the company had adopted his approach across all their products. As Marcus talked, Brad and Jennifer were whispering to each other. They weren't even pretending to listen anymore. At one point, Brad pulled out his phone and showed something to Jennifer. They both looked at the screen and smiled. Marcus stopped talking mid-sentence, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy with whatever was on Brad's phone. "Sorry," Marcus said, his patience finally wearing thin. "Am I boring you?" Brad looked up, not at all embarrassed at being caught. No, continue," he said, putting his phone face down on the table. "I was finished anyway," Marcus said. "Great," Jennifer said, checking her watch. "I think we've covered everything we need to cover." Marcus frowned. The interview had barely lasted 30 minutes. He hadn't been given the technical assessment he was told would be part of the process. They hadn't asked him about his experience with any of the specific technologies mentioned in the job posting. They hadn't inquired about his salary expectations or his availability to start. All the normal components of a serious interview had been skipped. "I was told there would be a coding challenge," Marcus said. "The email I received said to expect a 90-minute technical interview, including a practical assessment." Brad and Jennifer looked at each other again. Brad shrugged. "Yeah, well, we've decided that won't be necessary. We've seen enough," the words hung in the air. "We've seen enough. Not we've heard enough about your qualifications. Not we've learned enough about your experience. We've seen enough." As if the decision had been made the moment Marcus walked through the door. Or perhaps even earlier, when they first saw his name and photo on his application. Marcus gathered his portfolio and placed it back in his case. His hands were steady, but inside he felt a mix of anger and disappointment. He had known this interview was going poorly, but some part of him had hoped it might turn around. That hope was gone now. "We'll be in touch," Jennifer said, standing up. She didn't extend her hand. Neither did Brad. "When should I expect to hear from you?" Marcus asked, knowing the answer but wanting to make them say it out loud. David Park had been the CEO of Tech Vision Solutions for 15 years. He had started the company in his garage when he was just 25 years old, working 18-hour days to turn his vision into reality. Now the company had 300 employees, offices in 5 cities, and annual revenue in the hundreds of millions. But despite all his success, David never forgot what it felt like to be underestimated. He was walking down the third-floor hallway that Monday morning, returning from a meeting with the engineering team. He had a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, reading through emails as he walked. It was a habit his assistant Sarah always warned him about. "One of these days you're going to walk into a wall," she would say. But David liked to use every minute efficiently. As he passed conference room B, he heard raised voices. Not quite shouting, but loud enough to catch his attention. David slowed his pace. The company had been growing fast, and sometimes that growth came with growing pains. Disagreements happened. Passionate debates about technical approaches were common in a tech company. He was about to keep walking when he heard something that made him stop completely. "You know, Marcus, I'm sure there's a company out there looking for someone like you." The voice was female, and there was something in the tone that set off alarm bells in David's mind. He had heard that particular tone before, many years ago when he was the one sitting across the interview table. It was the tone of someone who thought they were being clever with their insults. David stepped closer to the door. It was slightly open, just enough to see into the room and hear clearly. He saw two people standing by the table. Brad Henderson and Jennifer Mills. He recognized them both. Brad had been with the company for 3 years, Jennifer for 2. They were part of the recruitment team, responsible for screening candidates before they moved on to technical interviews with the department managers. "Maybe try applying to places with, different standards," Jennifer continued. David's jaw tightened. He positioned himself where he could see through the gap in the door without being visible from inside the room. "Don't worry," Brad said, stretching his arms above his head like he had just finished a workout. "I'm sure you'll find something that's a better fit for your background." The third person in the room was a young black man in a navy suit. He stood at the door, his back straight and his face carefully neutral. But David could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the handle of his portfolio case a little too tightly. This was someone who was working very hard to maintain his composure. "Thank you for your time," the young man said quietly, and walked out of the room. As the door swung open wider, David quickly pulled out his phone and pretended to be absorbed in reading something on the screen. The young man walked past him without making eye contact, heading toward the elevators. David watched him go, then turned his attention back to the conference room. Through the open door, he could hear Brad and Jennifer talking. "God, that was painful," Jennifer said. "Why do we even waste our time with these applications?" "Company policy," Brad replied. "We have to interview a certain number of diverse candidates." "Looks good for the statistics." David felt his blood pressure rising. He had implemented diversity recruiting initiatives because he genuinely believed the company would be stronger with people from different backgrounds, not for statistics, not for appearances, but because diverse teams made better products and solved problems more creatively. That was a fact supported by research and his own experience. "Did you see his face when I asked about diversity hires?" Jennifer laughed. "He looked so offended." "Please," Brad said. "Like he doesn't know that's the only reason he got interviews at his other jobs. Probably the only reason he got into MIT, too." David's hand clenched around his phone. He had heard enough. He was about to walk into the room and confront them immediately, but something stopped him. If he was going to do this, he needed to do it right. He needed documentation. He needed facts. He pulled up his voice recorder app and hit record, then moved closer to the door again. "That bit about the algorithm was hilarious," Jennifer was saying. "Did you see how he tried to show off by listing all those types?" "Like we care," Brad said. "Honestly, I didn't understand half of what he was saying. But that doesn't matter. We weren't going to hire him anyway." "Obviously," Jennifer agreed. "Did you see how I scored his application before he even came in?" 3 out of 10. "Same," Brad said. "I mean, I looked at his photo and his name and I just knew this wasn't going to work out. Why waste time actually reviewing his resume?" David stopped the recording. He had heard more than enough. His hands were shaking slightly, not from nervousness but from controlled anger. In 15 years of running this company, he had never been more furious with his employees. He turned away from the door and saw his assistant Sarah walking toward him with a tablet in her hand. "Sarah," he said quietly but urgently, "I need you to pull an application file for me right now. Name is Marcus Johnson. He was just interviewed for the senior developer position." Sarah looked surprised by the intensity in his voice, but she didn't ask questions. She was good at her job, and she knew when David needed something done immediately. She tapped on her tablet for a few seconds, then turned it to show him. "Here you go, Marcus Johnson, 28 years old, interviewed this morning by Brad Henderson and Jennifer Mills. David took the tablet and began scrolling through the application. His eyes grew wider with each line he read. Bachelor's degree in computer science from MIT with honors. 4 years of professional experience at 2 Fortune 500 companies. Multiple professional certifications in cloud computing and mobile development. Published research papers on machine learning applications. A portfolio that included several successful mobile apps with hundreds of thousands of downloads. And at the bottom of the preliminary screening notes, he saw what Jennifer had just bragged about. Brad and Jennifer had both scored the application a 3 out of 10 before the interview even took place. The notes section was nearly empty. Just a few words: diversity candidate, standard interview. David looked at the photo attached to the application. Marcus Johnson was a young man with an honest face wearing a professional smile. The kind of candidate who should have been fast-tracked to the technical team, not dismissed by recruiters who had decided his fate before meeting him. "Sarah," David said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "I need you to do something for me. I want you to find every application that Brad Henderson and Jennifer Mills have processed in the last 6 months. I want to see their preliminary scores and their notes." "That's going to take a while," Sarah said. "Then start now," David replied. "And I want you to pull their personnel files. Every performance review, every complaint, every note in their records." Sarah's eyes widened. She had worked with David long enough to know that this level of scrutiny meant something serious was happening. "Should I ask what this is about?" "You'll find out soon enough," David said. "Right now I need to talk to our head of HR and our legal counsel. Tell them to meet me in my office in 10 minutes. And cancel my lunch meeting. I'm going to be busy." David started walking toward his office, then stopped and turned back. "One more thing. Where does Marcus Johnson live? Is he local?" Sarah checked the tablet. "Yes, he lives about 20 minutes from here." "Good," David said. "Call him. Tell him the CEO would like to speak with him personally, and ask if he can come back this afternoon, 2 o'clock, and Sarah, be very polite, very professional. Make sure he knows that this is a genuine request, not some kind of trick." "I'll take care of it," Sarah said, already typing on her tablet. David continued to his office, his mind racing. He had built Tech Vision solutions on the principles of innovation and merit. The company's mission statement, which he had written himself on a napkin 15 years ago, talked about creating a workplace where the best ideas won, regardless of where they came from. Where talent was recognized and rewarded. Where everyone had the opportunity to contribute and grow. What he had just witnessed was a complete betrayal of those principles. David sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He pulled up the company's anti-discrimination policy, which he had personally overseen the writing of 5 years ago. It was clear and comprehensive. It explicitly stated that any form of discrimination based on race, gender, religion, or any other protected characteristic was grounds for immediate termination. He then looked up the company's hiring guidelines. There was a specific section about preliminary screening of candidates. Recruiters were supposed to evaluate applications based on objective criteria: education, experience, skills, and qualifications. They were supposed to score each category separately and provide detailed notes explaining their scores. The purpose was to ensure consistency and fairness across all candidates. Brad and Jennifer had ignored all of that. They had given a highly qualified candidate a failing score before even reading his resume properly. And based on what David had overheard, they had done it because of his race. There was a knock on his office door. David looked up to see his head of HR, Patricia Chen, and his legal counsel, Robert Martinez, walking in. Both looked concerned. "David, Sarah said you needed to see us urgently," Patricia said. "What's going on?" David gestured for them to sit down. "I just witnessed something that made me realize we have a serious problem in our recruitment department, and I need both of your expertise to handle this correctly." He spent the next 10 minutes explaining what he had seen and heard. He played the recording he had made. He showed them Marcus Johnson's application and the preliminary scores. He watched their faces as they processed the information. Patricia looked sick. "This is exactly the kind of thing we train people to avoid. We have mandatory anti-discrimination training for all employees, especially those in recruitment." "Clearly the training didn't work," David said. "Or they simply chose to ignore it." Robert was taking notes on his legal pad. "Based on what you've described and the recording, We have clear grounds for termination. This isn't a borderline case. This is explicit discrimination, documented prejudice, and a violation of company policy. What about Marcus Johnson? Patricia asked. He's the one who was harmed here. What are we going to do for him? That's why I asked Sarah to call him, David said. I want to offer him the position. But more than that, I want to apologize on behalf of the company. What he experienced in that room should never happen, and I need him to know that it doesn't represent who we are. He might not want to work here after that experience, Robert pointed out, and we'd have to respect that decision. I know, David said, but I have to try. At minimum, I owe him an apology and an explanation that those two people don't speak for this company. Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said, David, if Brad and Jennifer did this to Marcus Johnson, they've probably done it to other candidates. We need to review all their past applications. Already on it, David said. Sarah is pulling those files now. This is going to be complicated, Robert warned. Terminating 2 employees at once, especially in recruitment, is going to raise questions. We need to document everything carefully. I want everything documented, David said firmly. I want a record of exactly what happened and why we took the action we took. Because I'm not just firing them. I'm making sure everyone in this company understands that this behavior will not be tolerated. Ever. He looked at both of them. We're going to handle this by the book. We're going to follow every procedure, dot every I and cross every T. But make no mistake, Brad Henderson and Jennifer Mills will not be working for this company by the end of today. Patricia and Robert exchanged glances, then both nodded. Let's get to work, David said. Marcus was sitting in his apartment, trying to process what had just happened when his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with the same area code as Tech Vision Solutions. His first instinct was to ignore it. He didn't want to hear their rejection call. He didn't want to listen to some scripted message about how they had decided to go in a different direction. But something made him answer. Hello? Hello, is this Marcus Johnson? The voice was female, professional, and warm. Yes, this is Marcus. Mr. Johnson, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm the executive assistant to David Park, the CEO of Tech Vision Solutions. Mr. Park would like to speak with you personally this afternoon if you're available. Would 2 o'clock work for you? Marcus sat up straighter. The CEO wanted to speak with him? That was unexpected. Can I ask what this is regarding? Mr. Park would prefer to discuss that with you in person, Sarah said. But I can assure you this is a genuine request. He specifically asked me to let you know that this is important. Marcus hesitated. Part of him wanted to say no. He had just spent 30 minutes being disrespected and dismissed. Why would he go back for more? But another part of him was curious. CEOs didn't usually get involved in standard interviews. Something was happening. Yes, Marcus said finally. I can be there at 2 o'clock. Wonderful, Sarah said. When you arrive, please come directly to the executive floor. That's the 5th floor. I'll be waiting for you at the elevator. After hanging up, Marcus sat on his couch and stared at his phone. He thought about calling his mother, but he didn't know what he would say. The interview had been a disaster, but now the CEO wanted to see him. It didn't make sense. He decided to change into a fresh shirt and make sure he looked professional. Whatever was about to happen, he would face it the way he faced everything else, with dignity and preparation. At 1:45, Marcus pulled into the Tech Vision Solutions parking lot. He sat in his car for a few minutes gathering his thoughts. Then he grabbed his portfolio and walked into the building. The same receptionist from that morning smiled at him. Back so soon, Mr. Johnson? I have a meeting with Mr. Park, Marcus said. Her eyebrows raised slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Of course. 5th floor, the executive level. Marcus took the elevator up, his heart beating faster than it had that morning. When the doors opened, a woman in her 30s with short black hair and a friendly smile was waiting. Mr. Johnson, I'm Sarah Chen, thank you for coming back. Please follow me. She led him down a hallway that was noticeably nicer than the 3rd floor. The carpet was thicker. The walls had real artwork instead of corporate posters, and everything felt more expensive. Sarah stopped at a large wooden door with a nameplate that read, David Park, Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Park is just finishing up a call, Sarah said. He'll be with you in just a moment. Can I get you some water or coffee? Water would be great, thank you, Marcus said. Sarah disappeared and returned quickly with a bottle of water. He's ready for you now, she said, opening the door. David Park stood up from behind his desk as Marcus entered. He was a Korean-American man in his early 40s, wearing an expensive charcoal suit but no tie. His expression was serious but not unfriendly. "Mr. Johnson," David said, walking around his desk and extending his hand. "Thank you for coming back. I know this must be confusing. Please have a seat." Marcus shook his hand and sat down in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. David sat in the other chair next to him, rather than going back behind his desk. It felt more personal than professional. "Mr. Johnson," David began, "I need to start with an apology. What you experienced in your interview this morning was completely unacceptable. It was unprofessional, it was discriminatory, and it does not represent the values of this company." Marcus felt his chest tighten. So someone had heard, or maybe Brad and Jennifer had reported something. He waited for David to continue. "I was walking past the interview room this morning," David said. "The door was slightly open, and I overheard the end of your interview. I heard what they said to you." He paused, his jaw clenching slightly. "I heard everything." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had spent the whole morning replaying the interview in his head, wondering if he had been too sensitive, if he had misread the situation. But now the CEO was sitting here, confirming that what he had experienced was real. "I want you to know that I've spent the last few hours reviewing your application," David continued, "and I'm going to be completely honest with you. You're exactly the kind of person we need at this company. Your qualifications are outstanding. Your experience is impressive. And the fact that Brad Henderson and Jennifer Mills didn't see that is not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on them." David leaned forward, his expression intense. "I also want you to know that I pulled their preliminary screening of your application. They scored you a 3 out of 10 before you even walked in the door. They based that score on your photo and your name, not on your qualifications." Marcus felt a wave of anger wash over him. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was different. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," David said, "and because I want to offer you the position of senior developer. But I'll understand if you say no. After what you experienced this morning, I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to see this building again." Marcus stared at him. "You're offering me the job?" "Yes," David said simply. "The position comes with a salary of $130,000, which is 15% higher than what we advertised. You'll have a full benefits package, stock options, and a starting bonus. But more importantly, I want to offer you the opportunity to help me fix what's broken in our hiring process." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the parking lot. "I built this company from nothing. I started in my garage with 2 other people. We worked crazy hours eating ramen and sleeping on air mattresses because we believed in what we were building." He turned back to face Marcus. "One of the things I believed in was creating a company where people were judged on merit, where the best idea won no matter who it came from, where everyone had a fair chance." He walked back and sat down again. "But somewhere along the way, I let people into this company who don't share those values. And I didn't catch it because I was focused on growth and revenue and market share. I took my eye off the culture." He looked directly at Marcus. "That's on me, and I want to fix it." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't what he had expected. He had prepared himself for another disappointment, another door closing. He hadn't prepared for someone to actually care about what happened. "What about Brad and Jennifer?" Marcus asked. "They'll be terminated before the end of the day," David said flatly. "What they did was a violation of company policy and basic human decency. There's no place for them here." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," David said. "Why do you care? I mean, you're the CEO of a successful company. You could have just ignored what you heard, or sent me a polite rejection email. Why are you personally involved in this?" David smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Can I tell you a story?" Marcus nodded. 20 years ago, I was trying to get funding for my first startup," David began. "I had a solid business plan, a working prototype, and projections that showed we could be profitable within 2 years. I pitched to 12 different venture capital firms. 11 of them turned me down, not because the business plan was bad, but because they couldn't believe that a 25-year-old Korean kid from a state school could build something worthwhile." He leaned back in his chair. "I heard every excuse in the book. Too young, too inexperienced, not the right background. One guy actually told me that Asian people were good at executing ideas but not at creating them. That we were better at engineering than entrepreneurship. Marcus felt his stomach twist. He knew that feeling too well. The 12th firm took a chance on me, David continued, not because they were particularly enlightened, but because one of the partners had done his homework. He actually reviewed my prototype. He looked at my code. He analyzed my business model. And he saw potential. That investment changed my life. David looked at Marcus directly. I heard something in your interview that I've heard before directed at me. I saw someone being dismissed not because of lack of ability, but because of who they are. And I can't let that happen in my company. I won't let it happen. Marcus felt his eyes getting wet. He blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. Thank you, he said quietly. You don't know what this means. I think I do, David said. So what do you say? Will you give us a chance? Marcus thought about it. A huge part of him wanted to say yes immediately, but he had to be practical. Can I ask about the team I'd be working with? The people I'd be reporting to? Of course, David said. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Sarah, can you ask Thomas Kim to come to my office, please? A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. A man in his 30s with glasses and a casual button-down shirt walked in. Thomas, this is Marcus Johnson, David said. Marcus, this is Thomas Kim, head of our development department. If you accept the position, you'll be reporting to him. Thomas smiled and shook Marcus's hand warmly. I've been hearing about you. Your application was actually flagged to come to my team after the preliminary screening, but somehow it got stopped in recruitment. I'm really glad David caught that. You've seen my application? Marcus asked. Seen it? Thomas laughed. I've been showing your fitness app to my team. The way you handled the machine learning integration is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. We're working on a new AI project, and someone with your skills would be perfect for it. Marcus felt his confidence returning. This was what a real interview should feel like. People who actually understood his work, who appreciated his skills. They talked for another 20 minutes about the project, the team structure, and the technical challenges. Thomas asked intelligent questions about Marcus's code and showed genuine interest in his problem-solving approaches. It was everything that morning's interview should have been. I'll let you two continue talking, David said, standing up. Marcus, I need to take care of something, but I'll be back shortly. Take your time deciding. After David left, Thomas pulled up a chair. Listen, I know this morning must have been terrible. David told me what happened, and I want you to know that the development team is nothing like that. We're a diverse group and we judge each other on one thing only. Can you write good code? That's it. That's all I've ever wanted, Marcus said. Then say yes, Thomas said with a smile. We need you, and I promise you'll have support here. Marcus thought about his mother's advice. Take your time with big decisions. Don't let emotion drive you. But sometimes the right decision was obvious. Sometimes you knew in your gut when something was meant to be. Yes, Marcus said. I'll take the position. Thomas grinned and shook his hand again. Welcome to TechVision. I'll send you the team introduction email tonight. As Thomas left, David returned. He looked at Marcus's face and smiled. You said yes. I did, Marcus confirmed. Good, David said. Now if you'll excuse me, I have something unpleasant to take care of. But Sarah will get you set up with HR to handle the paperwork. Your start date will be 3 weeks from today if that works for you. Marcus stood and shook David's hand once more. Thank you, Mr. Park, for everything. Call me David, he said. And thank you for giving us a second chance. After Marcus left with Sarah, David's expression hardened. He picked up his phone and called Patricia. It's time. Have Brad Henderson and Jennifer Mills come to conference room A. I'll meet you there. Brad Henderson was sitting at his desk, scrolling through social media on his phone, when he got the message from Patricia Chen. Conference room A, 3 o'clock. Attendance required. He frowned at the screen. These sudden meetings were always annoying, especially on a Monday. Probably another training session on something boring like workplace communication or time management. Jennifer Mills got the same message at her desk across the office. She walked over to Brad's cubicle. Did you see Patricia's message? Yeah, Brad said, not looking up from his phone. Probably some HR thing. You know how they are. Do you think it's about that candidate this morning? Jennifer asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Brad finally looked up. Marcus, what's his name? Why would it be about him? I don't know, Jennifer said, suddenly looking nervous. I just thought maybe he complained or something. Brad laughed. About what? We didn't do anything wrong. We interviewed him, and he wasn't a good fit. That's it. Stop being paranoid. But Jennifer's anxiety didn't completely fade. Maybe we shouldn't have said those things at the end. About him finding something that fits his background. Relax, Brad said, standing up and grabbing his coffee mug. Even if he did complain, which I doubt, it would be his word against ours. And we're employees in good standing. They're not going to take some random candidate's word over ours. Jennifer nodded, but she still looked worried as they walked toward conference room A. When they entered the room, they found Patricia Chen sitting at the head of the table with a laptop and several folders in front of her. Robert Martinez, the company's legal counsel, sat next to her with his own stack of documents. Both looked unusually serious. Have a seat, Patricia said, gesturing to the chairs across from them. Brad and Jennifer sat down. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy, official. This wasn't a training session. Thank you for coming, Patricia began. We need to discuss your conduct during an interview this morning with a candidate named Marcus Johnson. Brad felt his stomach drop slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. Okay, what about it? We've received information about inappropriate behavior during that interview, Patricia said. Specifically, discriminatory comments and unprofessional conduct. Jennifer's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. We conducted a standard interview. Robert opened one of the folders and pulled out a printed transcript. Let me read you some quotes from this morning. You know, Marcus, I'm sure there's a company out there looking for someone like you. Maybe try applying to places with, different standards. Does that sound familiar? The blood drained from Jennifer's face. Brad felt his heart start pounding. How did they know? Had someone been listening? Another quote, Robert continued. Don't worry. I'm sure you'll find something that's a better fit for your background. And one more. Urban schools in cities like Chicago, they're not exactly known for their high standards. Brad's mind was racing. Someone had heard them, but who? The door had been closed. Or had it? He tried to remember. The candidate had left and they had been talking. Had the door closed completely? I think there's been a misunderstanding, Brad said, trying to sound calm. We were just having a conversation about fit. Cultural fit is an important part of hiring. Cultural fit, Patricia repeated, her voice sharp. Is that what you call asking a candidate if he really wrote his own code? Or questioning whether he got into MIT through a special program? Or scoring his application a 3 out of 10 before you even met him? Jennifer gasped. How do you know about the preliminary scores? Because we reviewed your entire screening process, Patricia said. And we found some very concerning patterns. Robert pulled out another document. This is Marcus Johnson's application. Master's degree from MIT with honors. 4 years of professional experience at Fortune 500 companies. Published research papers. Successful mobile applications with hundreds of thousands of users. And you scored him a 3 out of 10. We can explain that, Brad said quickly. We evaluate candidates on multiple factors, not just credentials. Really? Robert said. Because according to your notes, you didn't evaluate anything. You wrote diversity candidate and standard interview. That's the entire content of your preliminary notes. Patricia pulled out her laptop and turned it toward them. We also reviewed the other candidates you've screened over the past 6 months. Do you want to know what we found? Brad and Jennifer sat in silence. You've processed 147 applications in the past 6 months, Patricia continued. Of those, 23 were from candidates with minority backgrounds. Do you know how many of those 23 you moved forward in the process? Neither Brad nor Jennifer answered. 3, Patricia said. 3 out of 23. That's a 13% approval rate. For comparison, your approval rate for white candidates was 58%. That's just coincidence, Brad said. Those candidates weren't qualified. Robert slid another sheet across the table. This is a candidate named Priya Sharma. Master's degree from Stanford. 6 years of experience. 5 technical certifications. You scored her a 4 out of 10. Your note says, English skills may be insufficient for client-facing work. She had an accent, Jennifer said defensively. She was born in California, Robert replied. She's a native English speaker. The only interview you conducted was by phone, and you decided based on her name that she had an accent problem. He pulled out another file. This is David Chen, PhD from Carnegie Mellon. 8 years of experience, published author in multiple technical journals. You scored him a 5 out of 10. Your note says, may not fit team culture. We have to consider culture fit, Brad insisted. What exactly did you mean by that? Patricia asked, her voice cold. Brad opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew any answer he gave would sound bad. Patricia folded her hands on the table. Let me be very clear about what's happening here. Your behavior this morning with Marcus Johnson was discriminatory and illegal. It violated company policy, federal employment law, and basic human decency. But it wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of discrimination that you've been engaging in for months. This is ridiculous, Brad said, his voice rising. You can't prove any of this. Robert pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the table. Actually, we can. He pressed play. Brad and Jennifer's voices filled the room. God, that was painful. Why do we even waste our time with these applications? Company policy. We have to interview a certain number of diverse candidates. Looks good for the statistics. Jennifer's face crumpled. Oh my God. The recording continued. Their mocking comments about Marcus. Their admission that they had scored him poorly before even reading his resume. Their laughter at his expense. Where did you get that? Brad demanded. That's illegal recording. It can't be used. It's not illegal, Robert said calmly. This is a one-party consent state. The person who made the recording was legally allowed to do so. Who recorded us? Jennifer asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. Patricia and Robert exchanged glances. Then the door to the conference room opened and David Park walked in. Brad and Jennifer both stood up instinctively. Every employee recognized the CEO, but most had never met him personally. He usually stayed on the executive floor, working on high-level strategy while the rest of the company handled daily operations. Please, sit down, David said, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. They sat. David remained standing. He walked slowly around the table, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. I made that recording, he said. I was walking past conference room B this morning when I heard you mocking a candidate. I heard every word you said to Marcus Johnson, and I heard what you said after he left. Jennifer started crying. Mr. Park, please, I can explain. Explain what? David said, his voice sharp. Explain how you decided a candidate wasn't good enough based on his race. Explain how you've been systematically rejecting qualified minority candidates for months. Please, I'd love to hear this explanation. Brad tried a different approach. Mr. Park, with all due respect, we were trying to maintain standards. We can't just hire people because of diversity quotas. David's expression hardened. Marcus Johnson has better qualifications than half the people currently working in this building. He has a degree from a better school than either of you attended. He has more experience, more skills, and more achievements. There was no question of standards. The only question was your prejudice. That's not fair, Brad protested. You want to talk about fair? David's voice rose for the first time. Let me tell you about fair. 20 years ago, I sat in rooms like this pitching my startup to investors. I had a solid plan, a working product, and real potential, and 11 out of 12 investors turned me down, not because my business plan was bad, but because they couldn't see past my face, my age, and my background. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. One of those investors told me that Asian people were good at executing other people's ideas, but not at creating our own. That we were workers, not innovators. He said it with the same condescending smile you gave Marcus Johnson this morning. Jennifer was sobbing now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, I need this job. I have a mortgage, bills. You should have thought about that before you decided to mock and humiliate a qualified candidate. David said coldly. You should have thought about that before you violated every principle this company stands for. Brad stood up abruptly. This is unfair. We're being targeted because of one complaint from some candidate who probably couldn't take criticism. Sit down, David said, his voice like ice. Brad remained standing, his face red with anger. No, I don't have to listen to this. If you fire me, I'll sue. I'll claim I was unfairly targeted. I'll tell everyone that this company cares more about political correctness than actual qualifications. David smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Please do. I would love to defend this termination in court. I have recordings, documentation, and a clear pattern of discrimination. I have a legal team that would be happy to explain to a judge exactly what you've been doing. He picked up one of the folders. I also have statements from 3 other candidates who experienced similar treatment from you. They reached out after we posted about improving our hiring practices last month. They described experiences identical to what Marcus went through. Brad's confidence wavered. That's not proof. It's more than enough, Robert interjected. Employment law is clear on this. Discrimination in hiring is illegal, and we have documented proof of discriminatory behavior. Patricia stood up and opened 2 envelopes she had been holding. Brad Henderson, Jennifer Mills, your employment with Tech Vision Solutions is terminated effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks of severance pay as required by your contracts. Your benefits will continue for 30 days. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, and your access to all company systems has been revoked. Jennifer put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Brad just stared at the envelope, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. This is wrong, Brad said quietly. We were just doing our jobs. No, David said. You are not doing your jobs. Your job was to identify talented candidates who could help this company grow. Instead, you let your prejudice blind you to real talent. You hurt people who deserved better, and you damaged this company's reputation. He walked toward the door, then turned back. I built this company on the idea that the best ideas should win, regardless of where they come from. That merit matters more than background, that everyone deserves a fair chance. You betrayed all of that, and now you're paying the price. There was a knock on the door. 2 security officers stood in the hallway. Please escort Mr. Henderson and Ms. Mills to their desks to collect personal items. Then see them out of the building, Patricia instructed. As Brad and Jennifer stood to leave, Jennifer turned back one more time. Please, Mr. Park, I made a mistake. Can't I have another chance? David looked at her for a long moment. Marcus Johnson asked for another chance this morning. He asked to take the technical assessment to prove his abilities. You denied him that. You decided his fate in the first 30 seconds you saw him. Why should you get a second chance when you refused to give him even a first one? Jennifer had no answer. She followed the security officers out of the room, Brad walking behind her with his head down. After they left, David sat down heavily in one of the chairs. Patricia and Robert remained standing. That was necessary, Patricia said softly. But it wasn't easy. No, David agreed. But it was right. And we're not done. I want a complete review of our hiring practices. I want new training for everyone in recruitment. And I want regular audits to make sure this never happens again. We'll make it happen, Robert said. David stood up and looked out the window. Somewhere out there, Marcus Johnson was probably telling his family about getting the job. Somewhere out there, other talented people were being overlooked because someone couldn't see past their prejudice. But not at Tech Vision. Not anymore. 3 months had passed since that day in the conference room. Marcus Johnson sat at his desk on the development floor of Tech Vision Solutions, reviewing code on his dual monitor setup. His workspace was personalized now with a small plant from his mother, a framed photo of his family, and a coffee mug that said, I turn coffee into code. Marcus, got a minute? Thomas Kim appeared at his cubicle entrance with a laptop under his arm. Sure, what's up? Marcus said, spinning his chair around. I want to show you something, Thomas said, pulling up a chair. He opened his laptop and showed Marcus a graph. This is our application flow from the past 3 months. Look at the difference. The graph showed 2 distinct sections. The first 3 months of the year showed a narrow funnel with many applications being rejected at the preliminary screening stage. The past 3 months showed a much wider funnel with significantly more candidates. Making it through to technical interviews, we're seeing almost double the number of qualified candidates reaching the technical interview stage, Thomas explained. And the quality is just as high, if not higher. Marcus smiled. The blind resume review is working. It's more than working, Thomas said. It's changing everything. We've hired 6 people in the past 3 months, and every single one of them is exceptional, including you. After Thomas left, Marcus turned back to his monitors. The AI integration project he was leading had made significant progress. The system he was building would help analyze user behavior patterns and provide personalized recommendations. It was challenging work, the kind that made him excited to come in every morning. His phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. 2 o'clock meeting with David Park and the HR team. Marcus saved his work and headed to the conference room. When he arrived, he found David, Patricia, Thomas, and 2 other people he recognized from HR. There was also a woman he didn't know, holding a notebook and wearing a visitor badge. Marcus, thank you for joining us, David said. This is Rebecca Foster from the Society for Human Resource Management. She's been studying our hiring process changes as a potential case study. Rebecca smiled and shook Marcus's hand. "I've heard a lot about you, Mr. Johnson. Your role in reshaping the recruitment process here has been remarkable." Marcus felt a bit uncomfortable with the praise. "I just provided some input. Patricia and her team did the real work." "Don't be modest," Patricia said. "Your insights were crucial. The blind resume screening system, the structured interview guides, the diverse interview panels, all of those came from your suggestions." Rebecca pulled out her notebook. "Can you walk me through your thinking? What made you focus on these specific changes?" Marcus thought about how to answer. "When I was sitting in that interview room 3 months ago, I kept thinking about all the preparation I had done. I had practiced my answers, organized my portfolio, researched the company. But none of it mattered because Brad and Jennifer had decided I wasn't right before I even walked in." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The problem wasn't that I wasn't qualified. The problem was that they never looked at my qualifications objectively. They saw my name, saw my photo, and made assumptions, so the solution had to remove those elements from the initial screening." "The blind resume review," Rebecca said, writing notes. "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "In the first round, recruiters only see education, experience, skills, and work history. No names, no photos, nothing that reveals race or gender. They score the application based purely on objective qualifications. Only after a candidate passes that screening do they get the full application." David leaned forward. "The results have been dramatic. Our candidate diversity has increased by 60%, and the quality metrics have actually improved." "But the blind review was just the first step," Patricia added. "Marcus helped us develop a structured interview guide that ensures every candidate gets asked the same core questions. It reduces bias because interviewers can't just make up questions designed to trip up certain candidates." Thomas jumped in. "We also implemented diverse interview panels. Every candidate meets with at least 3 different people from different backgrounds. If one person has a bias, the others can catch it." Rebecca was writing quickly. "This is exactly the kind of systematic approach that other companies need to see. Would you be willing to present this at our national conference next month?" Marcus looked surprised. "Me? Present at a conference?" "You and the team," Rebecca clarified. "But yes, we'd love for you to share your story. Not just the technical changes, but the experience that led to them." Marcus glanced at David, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll do it," Marcus said. "If it helps other people avoid what I went through, it's worth it." After the meeting ended, David asked Marcus to stay behind for a moment. "How are you doing, really?" David asked once they were alone. "Not just the work stuff, but everything else. It's been 3 months, but that was a traumatic experience." Marcus appreciated the question. Not everyone asked about the emotional impact. "Honestly, some days are easier than others. I still think about that interview. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been walking past that room." "I think about that too," David admitted, "which is why we can't rely on luck. We need systems that work even when no one is listening at the door." "That's what we're building," Marcus said. David smiled. "You know, I offered you this position 3 months ago thinking you'd be a great developer. And you are. But what I didn't expect was that you'd become a leader in changing our entire culture." "I'm just trying to make things better," Marcus said. "That's what leadership is," David replied. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked with Patricia's team to prepare the conference presentation. They gathered data on the changes they had implemented and the results they had achieved. The numbers told a compelling story. More diverse candidates, higher quality hires, better retention rates, and improved team performance. But Marcus knew the real story wasn't in the numbers. It was in the people, like Sarah Okonkwo, a brilliant data scientist from Nigeria who had been rejected by multiple companies before TechVision's blind screening process recognized her exceptional qualifications. She was now leading a critical analytics project, or James Chen, a 52-year-old developer who had been written off as too old by other tech companies. The blind screening removed age assumptions, and his decades of experience proved invaluable to the team. Or Aisha Rahman, a Muslim woman who wore a hijab and had been told in previous interviews that she might not fit the tech culture. Under the new system, she was evaluated on her skills alone and was now one of the fastest rising engineers in the company. The conference was held in San Francisco. Marcus had never spoken in front of a large audience before, but when he walked onto the stage and saw the crowd of HR professionals, recruiters, and business leaders, He felt calm. He had a story worth telling. 3 months ago, I walked into a job interview feeling confident and prepared, Marcus began. I walked out of that interview feeling humiliated and dismissed. But what happened next changed not just my life, but the entire hiring culture at TechVision Solutions. He told the story, not sparing the difficult parts. He talked about the racist comments, the assumptions, the prejudice. He saw people in the audience nodding, some with tears in their eyes. These were people who had either experienced similar discrimination or felt guilty about perpetuating it. Then he shifted to the solutions. He walked through each change they had implemented, explaining the reasoning behind it and showing the data that proved it worked. He emphasized that the goal wasn't just to increase diversity numbers, but to find the best talent regardless of background. The beautiful thing about removing bias from the process, Marcus said, is that everyone wins. Companies get better employees, candidates get fair evaluations, and the people who actually deserve the job get the opportunity to prove it. The presentation received a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people approached Marcus with questions. How do we implement blind screening in our company? How do we train interviewers to avoid bias? How do we convince leadership that this is worth the investment? Marcus answered every question patiently. He shared his contact information. He offered to help however he could. One woman, probably in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes, waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. Mr. Johnson, I'm a recruiting manager at a company in Boston. 20 years ago, I was the person sitting across the table from you. I was Brad and Jennifer. Marcus looked at her carefully. What changed? I saw what my bias cost my company, she said. We lost incredible talent because I couldn't see past my assumptions. I spent years trying to make up for it, but I never quite knew how. Your presentation gave me a roadmap. Thank you. Marcus shook her hand. It's never too late to change. 6 months after starting at TechVision, Marcus was promoted to senior team leader. He now managed a team of 5 developers, all of whom had been hired through the new blind screening process. The diversity on his team was notable, but what mattered more was the quality of work they produced together. One afternoon, David stopped by Marcus's desk. Got a minute? They walked to David's office, where Sarah offered Marcus his usual water. I wanted to show you something, David said, pulling up a video on his computer. This is from a tech industry conference I attended last week. The video showed a panel discussion titled, Building Inclusive Tech Companies. One of the panelists was mentioning TechVision Solutions as a model for effective diversity hiring. We're being recognized as industry leaders, David said, not just in hiring practices, but in creating a genuinely inclusive culture. That's because of the work you've done. We've done, Marcus corrected. This wasn't just me. No, David agreed. But it started with you, with your willingness to come back after what happened, with your decision to help us fix the problem instead of just walking away. Marcus thought about that day 6 months ago when Sarah had called and asked him to come back. He could have said no. He could have written off TechVision as just another company with systemic problems. But something about David's immediate action, his genuine desire to fix what was broken, had convinced Marcus to give them a chance. I'm glad I came back, Marcus said. This feels like home now. Good, David said. Because I have another challenge for you. I want to create a new position. Director of Diversity and Inclusion. It would be part-time in addition to your development work. You'd work with HR to expand what we've built in hiring to other areas like promotion processes, team formation, and leadership development. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. That's a big responsibility. You've already proven you can handle it, David said. Think about it. Talk to your family. Let me know. That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment with his mother, who had come to visit for the weekend. He told her about the offer. What do you want to do? She asked. I want to say yes, Marcus admitted, but part of me worries that I'll be seen as the diversity guy instead of a developer. Like my race becomes my job. His mother was quiet for a moment. When you were little, you used to take apart electronics to see how they worked. You'd spend hours figuring out how to put them back together. Do you remember what you told me when I asked why you did it? Marcus smiled. I wanted to understand how things worked so I could fix them when they broke. That's what you're doing now, she said. You're not making this about race. You're fixing a system that was broken. The fact that you experience that brokenness personally makes you better equipped to fix it, not less qualified. Marcus called David the next morning and accepted the position. 1 year after that terrible interview, Marcus gave another presentation. This time it was internal, to the entire TechVision Solutions staff. He stood in the company auditorium with David, Patricia, Thomas, and several team members who had contributed to the cultural changes. A year ago, I almost gave up on this company, Marcus said to the assembled employees. But one person decided that what happened to me was unacceptable. One person chose to act instead of ignore, and that choice rippled out to affect everything. He showed slides with statistics. Employee satisfaction was up. Productivity was up. Innovation metrics showed more patents filed and more successful products launched. And the diversity numbers had fundamentally shifted. The company now looked like the world it served. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Marcus continued. The real story is in the people in this room. People who might not have had a chance before. People who were judged on their abilities instead of their appearance. People who found a workplace where they could truly belong. After the presentation, Marcus walked back to his desk. He passed Sarah Okonkwo's workspace, where she was in an intense discussion about data models with her team. He passed James Chen, who was mentoring a younger developer. He passed Aisha Rahman, who was presenting her latest code to a group of impressed colleagues. At his own desk, Marcus found a handwritten note from David. Marcus, thank you for taking a chance on us. Thank you for helping us become the company we always should have been. This is just the beginning. David Marcus pinned the note to his cubicle wall next to his family photo. He thought about Brad and Jennifer wherever they were now. He hoped they had learned something from what happened. He hoped they had changed, but whether they had or not, TechVision had changed. And that change was spreading. Marcus received emails almost weekly from other companies asking for advice on implementing similar systems. Some were genuine in their desire to change. Others just wanted to look good. Marcus helped them all because even small changes could make a difference in someone's life. His phone buzzed with a message from a young black developer named Jamal. Someone Marcus had been mentoring virtually. Just got hired at my dream company. They said they're implementing blind screening because they read about what you guys did at TechVision. Thank you for fighting for people like us. Marcus smiled and typed back, Congratulations. Now go show them what you can do. That evening, Marcus stayed late at the office working on a particularly tricky piece of code. The sun was setting outside his window, casting orange light across his desk. He was completely absorbed in the problem, the way he had been since he was 14 years old teaching himself to code. David walked by and saw the light on in Marcus's workspace. He stopped in the doorway. Still here? Just finishing something up, Marcus said without looking away from his screen. Don't stay too late, David said. Remember, tomorrow we have that meeting with the new recruits. 6 new hires starting all through the blind screening process. I'll be there, Marcus promised. After David left, Marcus sat back in his chair and looked around the office. A year ago, he had walked into this building nervous and hopeful. He had been mocked, dismissed, and humiliated. But he had also found something he didn't expect. He had found a leader who cared about doing the right thing. He had found a team that valued his contribution. He had found a workplace that, despite its flaws, was willing to change. Most importantly, he had found his voice. The confidence to speak up when he saw injustice. The courage to help fix broken systems. The strength to turn a painful experience into meaningful change. Marcus shut down his computer and gathered his things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight he would go home and rest, knowing that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As he walked through the parking lot to his car, Marcus looked back at the TechVision building. The lights were still on in many offices. People working late, building products, solving problems, creating the future. And now, thanks to the changes he helped implement, those people came from all backgrounds, all experiences, all walks of life. That was the real victory. Not just that Marcus had gotten the job he deserved, but that the next person, and the person after that, and the person after that would get a fair chance too. Marcus smiled, got in his car, and drove home. Tomorrow would be another day of writing code, leading meetings, and helping make TechVision better. But tonight he would call his mother and tell her about the 6 new hires starting tomorrow. One of them is a young woman from a small town in Alabama, Marcus would tell her. Another is an immigrant from Ethiopia. There's a single dad who's been trying to get back into tech after years away. Each of them has an amazing story and incredible skills. And they all got their chance because someone looked at their qualifications instead of their circumstances. His mother would say what she always said, "I'm proud of you, Marcus. Not because of what you've accomplished, but because of how you've used your success to help others." And Marcus would realize, as he had many times over the past year, that the worst interview of his life had led him to exactly where he needed to be. Not just for himself, but for everyone who would come after him.